This is a conversation about, I guess it's about data and it's about risk and it's about megatrends, but it's also a conversation about usership and ownership as well. My name is Abraham. I'm the Area VP at Pure Storage in EMEA for what we call our Evergreen portfolio. And that's the portfolio of all the different ways that customers can consume our technology. We've been building solutions to store and protect mission-critical data for about 15 years now. And we continue to innovate what we do based on the feedback that we get and the challenge that we get, quite frankly. And there's a few things I just wanted to explore with you today, I suppose. Any of you heard of a guy called Glenn Gers? I think that's how you pronounce it. Gers, I reckon. He's an American screenwriter. And he coaches other screenwriters too. And he talks about, in stories and in films, when you're writing films and stories, to think in scenes and think of 6 questions. Like, you ought to be able to tell a story inside 6 questions. Who is it about? What do they want? Why can't they get it? What do they do about that? Why doesn't it work? And how does it end? Now, some of you might recognize that as like the hero's journey type story. But I find it's incredibly effective, especially for little segments like this. So who is this story about? It's about all of you, actually. And what is it that you consistently tell us that you want? Well, there's some table stakes stuff, like I need a safe and secure and stable platform to run my business on that is effective and efficient and doesn't cost an arm and a leg to change, right? Table stakes for everybody. But beyond that, we often get challenged with, well, I also want other stuff. I want flexibility, and I want agility, and I want predictability, and I want fairness around my commercials around that. And I guess if we were to dig into why has that not been possible, or only possible to a certain degree, I would put that down somewhat to some historically acquired and inherited behaviors and mindset around usage and acquisition of technology. Why doesn't that work? Well, you end up with having to make long-term forecasts and guesses over what you might need over a long time. You make upfront investments that have to pay off in the end. So I just want to go back through, I guess, some of the principles that we apply to ourselves at Pure that I'm kind of offering to you, really, as principles that you might hold any provider of yours to, a standard that you might hold any of your providers or prospective providers. And I guess the philosophy goes along these kinds of lines, really. I'm walking over and pressing this little button on here because I did not bring a clicker with me. Rookie mistake I made. So look, if you can't read them, these 3 themes are operations, architecture, and commercial. And what we really mean by that is the operational experience that you've all been telling us that you want, beyond the table stakes, the flexibility, the agility, is driven by underlying architecture that allows it. Like, why is that stuff not possible at the moment? Because on-premise rigid infrastructure is hard to manage and hard to change, and it attracts technical debt the moment it's deployed. So if you want a flexible and agile operational experience, there has to be architecture and infrastructure underneath that allows it. Similar to the concepts that apply to the public cloud. People went to the public cloud, continue to go to the public cloud for a number of reasons: to avoid technical debt, to be able to get access to seemingly limitless resources, and to get commercials that are based on usage somehow. But what we found is even businesses that have gone to public cloud tend to achieve 2 out of 3 of these things, maybe. Perhaps you can get the operational experience, the underlying architecture certainly allows it, but do you get the commercials that make sense? Overwhelming feedback that we get is actually if a lot of data of a particular workload type or application lives in the public cloud, it can be costly to do that. So actually what we've found is you can achieve all of the things that you originally set out to do with a combination: on-premise infrastructure and public cloud, or just on-premise. And I suppose that's where I segue really into the topic that I guess this is, we chose the title here. mitigating risk and in the face of megatrends. To the point about making long-term forecasts of usage, I mean, all right, we've got a huge amount of discussion about AI today. We wouldn't have been having these discussions 18 months, 2 years ago, I suppose, not to this degree. Before that, there was a huge focus on cloud. Not that long ago, we had COVID to contend with. And I guess any of you in the room, you know your own businesses very well. But to what degree do you think that you can make 3, 4, 5-year forecasts of requirements accurately anymore? And it's not a trick question. I mean, maybe some of you can. We find the overwhelming majority of our customers can't anymore. They might have been able to at one point, but now they can't. And so I guess this comes down to a bit of a discussion about supply and demand. The organizations I worked for before Pure, it was always an arm wrestle, I suppose, between application owners' lines of business generating demand for an internal IT department or a service provider, but the demand was always unpredictable, difficult to supply to. Once the demand was ratified, it was slow and cumbersome for service providers to respond to it. And there was a constant tension. So our thoughts, I suppose, are, let's not try to change the demand side of this formula anymore. I mean, I've tried to do that in various capacities over the last 20 or so years in lots of different organizations. It doesn't really work. So why don't we change the supply side instead? And at Pure, we think about the storage and protection of mission critical data. And I want to introduce a concept I think that that we base all of our conversations on now. And we use these principles to drive the development of the solutions that we offer. So what we call our enterprise data cloud, powered by the Pure Storage platform, has a number of layers to it. So at the bottom most layer in what we call this enterprise data cloud is Pure Evergreen architecture. Now this is architecture that can either be physical in data centers or virtual in public cloud hyperscalers like AWS and Azure. The infrastructure itself can be non-disruptively scaled in line with usage. And just really think about that for a second. Like, is there any infrastructure you can think of that can scale up, out, be replaced, be refreshed, be added to, be taken away from, be moved from one location to another, change tiers of performance, all while the business application processes on that infrastructure remain running? You can certainly achieve some of that in the public cloud to a degree, but it's not yet been possible with on-premise infrastructure. And of course you can build in plenty of resilience and high availability. You can have failovers and do things like that, but if you want to change an infrastructure component, typically there has to be an outage of some kind. So Pure Storage Evergreen storage architecture stays online all the time. So we can upgrade, we can add to, we can deploy additional arrays, we can change tiers of service, we can add capacity, we can take it away, and we can move capacity and data between locations. We can move capacity and data from on-premise to public cloud and back again if we wanted to, all non-disruptively while business services stay online. So the next layer up is the operating system that all of that technology runs. And why am I talking about such low-level, tedious-sounding things like operating systems? Well, I'm sorry about this, but we've got to touch on some of it because the alternatives in the industry today are based on a really eclectic kind of heterogeneous portfolio of different storage products that have evolved over the years. Vendors that operate in the same space as I do have acquired different companies that have different technologies. They don't really talk to each other as seamlessly. The OS and API stack across all of this technology I'm talking about at Pure is identical, whether we're talking about public cloud or any type of workload across the board. And then finally, you've got the orchestration layer. So automation across this whole platform can now policy-based, self-service, self-optimizing, move data to wherever it needs to be for any user, any location, any time. You have a degree of control over that, but you can set policy and let the system with inbuilt AI make some decisions or at least some recommendations for you as well. There's an incredible amount of governance and structure built in, so things like anomaly detection, policy assessment and proactive reporting against industry regulatory requirements as well. all built into the platform without needing any third-party applications on the top. So those are the kind of key principles. And as I say, delivering this data cloud capability as a service. And why I labour the as a service piece is back to the forecasting and the demand and supply conversation. No longer would a consumer of this have to create an accurate 3, 4, 5, or even a 1 or 2 year forecast of requirement. This platform and the way it's consumed moves dynamically with the needs and requirements of line of business owners or application owners in the way that you would expect a public cloud to behave. So you could now throw a requirement at this, and I don't know how many of you are in receipt or on the receiving end of requests from lines of business that say, hey, right, our competitor in the market has just done this. We need to respond to them within the next month or something. We need a quick R&D project. We need something up, a dev environment, something virtual, spin us up something so we can develop on here. Well, how would you respond to that? You have to respond with whatever you've got on the floor today. But what about if you were able to click your finger and have a supplier without doing a transaction, without placing an order, have a supplier non-disruptively flex something that's already on the floor, within hours or days instead, and then cycle it back down again when it's not needed. That's how this platform performs. So I guess the premise of this is what we're providing, what we deliver is we essentially deploy a little enterprise storage data cloud into a customer's DC. We look after that. We pay for the privilege of putting our equipment into those locations, whether it's a colo or a GSI MSP data center or a customer's own facility. We look at how much power our equipment consumes. We look at how much space our equipment consumes, and we pay whoever's paying that data center bill. We pay for the cost incurred for hosting our equipment there. Because we think if you were going to consume a service in the public cloud, you wouldn't be paying for the power and electricity, not directly anyway. So why should you pay for those costs when you consume this kind of cloud? And we assure what we provide in tiers of service with a whole set of SLAs, and we perform a bunch of management functions around that to guarantee that there's never running out of capacity, performance never erodes, availability never fails, and a whole load of other things around data durability as well. So I guess what that means is if you've got that kind of non-disruptively scaling data cloud in your locations, that now means that you can service any user, any workload, anytime, any location, to the point of those requests coming in. So I suppose we think about it as we maintain the cloud and customers still maintain what they put inside that cloud. We don't have any insight or access into customer data. We don't have any access to that. And we have customers that use this platform, this service, in all possible verticals, in all different geos, really highly regulated environments, like healthcare and defense. We have deployments of this service on cruise ships and container ships making their way across the ocean. We have them in completely isolated dark sites. We have them on aircraft. We have them in public sector buildings, any vertical you can think of. Financial services tend to lead the way with consuming innovation like this, but I guess the point is servicing any kind of user, any location, anytime. I guess we've already talked about it, but the point for us is creating this ubiquitous data cloud where you can use this platform to move data to wherever it needs to be to service any requirement. You remember I made I'll take back my little joke about Danilo's little catchy tune, but he made obviously some really excellent points. Do you remember him talking about keeping AI solutions hydrated with data and it being difficult with silos of data, A, to collect the data together, but B, to feed those AI systems with enough throughput to satisfy the GPUs? We have customers investing in a phenomenal amount of money in things like NVIDIA superpods with a huge amount of GPUs that are themselves capable of huge computations for AI. But the constraint those customers have is getting the actual data, right? Having a pipe big enough to get that data so that all the GPUs can be active all the time. It's incredibly difficult to do that. So we've built specific services around hydrating those GPU-heavy systems with enough data, and we put guarantees around that. So it's on us, it's on our dollar and our risk to make sure equipment is upgraded all the time to be able to provide that throughput. But I think the point here is a ubiquitous data cloud where you can define the policies, you can define the experience you want end users to have. Data will move around, and if all of this is sounding like maybe kind of interesting, but it's sounding incredibly expensive, a huge part of the point here is that it's got to be more efficient. Back to the very first statement I think I made, the table stakes requirement, having a safe and secure and stable environment to run the business of that is effective and efficient, efficient at least meaning cost efficient, and doesn't cost an arm and a leg to change. So actually what we find is, in almost every case, commercially at least, consuming this platform works out a lot better than making those upfront investments in infrastructure or upfront commitments to hyperscalers to commit to reserving a load of capacity. Because how can I make the argument that consuming this ought to be more efficient than investing in infrastructure and then charge a premium for it in having saved you money, right? I can't just take that back. But I suppose the graphic here is just illustrating how we can move data around, but you're in charge, right? You decide where that data needs to be. Your policies define that. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. So back to our questions, who is this about? I think this is about you guys. And what is it that you were trying to get? Well, we've talked about the table stakes requirement, but we've talked about the going further than that, having enough flexibility and agility to be able to service your application owners and line of business demands, but not being ripped off in the process, right? Having the flexibility, but not at a massive premium. Why can't you get that? Well, historically, investing in infrastructure or procuring services don't have infrastructure underneath them that allows non-disruptive change, and they're often tying you into covering the cost of whoever's providing that service. So you're kind of locked in anyway, right? Where would you go? What would you do about that? Well, you'd start to look at maybe some as-a-service consumption models, maybe from MSPs or from GSIs, to try and take the risk away from your own organizations. I'm sure many of you or all of you are already doing that anyway. But back to the infrastructure point, if those services are based on inflexible, rigid infrastructure underneath, or they're based on a commitment you've made to a hyperscaler, then you're kind of stuck anyway. If you want to change strategy 2 years into a 5-year plan, what are you going to do? How is your provider going to cover their own cost and risk to allow you to make that change? So that's why that doesn't work. But what do you do about that instead? Well, you look at services like this that have all 3 of those components. Yes, they'll give you the operational experience that you're looking for. Yes, they have underlying architecture that you can change non-disruptively, and they have the commercial model that means you aren't getting rinsed for the first 2 components, and that you have control over that commercial situation too. Only paying for data where it's stored for as long as it's stored sounds like the fairest way to me to do that. And what happens in the end? Well, consumers of a service like that become masters of usership. They're able to extend all of that flexibility and self-service capability to end users, application owners, without risk of overexposure, without risk of over-provisioning infrastructure or under-provisioning, without risk of over-investing or under-investing, and tying cost directly to usage, and being able to change strategy in an instant, right? I thought this was my 5-year plan a year ago, now it's not. Now we're doing massive AI investment, so switch all that stuff off over there, please. Pile it into this instead, no problem, we got you. That's pretty much it, guys. I hope that was somewhere close to what you were expecting. We might have about like 1 minute if anybody has any thoughts or questions or wants to throw any challenge at me. Thank you very much. Thank you.